Tonight on Your Week, hundreds of Americans are out in full force protesting the ongoing stay-at-home orders. Plus,
we continue to see a number of positive signs that the virus has passed its peak.
President Trump tries to strike a conciliatory tone about the battle against the coronavirus, but is it easing the concerns of the American public? And
we are now in a pandemic-induced recession here in the state of California.
Blame it on the coronavirus, the economic impact facing the West Coast and the rest of the nation. All this and more on Your Week. Hello, America. This is Your Week, and I'm your host, Eddie McCoven. Top story tonight, civil unrest in America. It's been over a month since our federal and local governments have asked folks to stay at home, close non-essential businesses, all in an effort to dampen the spread of the deadly novel coronavirus. Now, most citizens have complied with these orders for the first 15 days and for most of the latter editions. But one thing we know as Americans, you can't hold us in our homes forever. Sooner or later, people are going to be frustrated by this drastic change to our day-to-day lives. And not surprisingly, this week, Americans began demonstrating.
Open Texas now! Open Texas now! Open Texas now! Let us work! Let us work! Let us work!
And that's protesters in Austin, Texas, Saturday morning with the rallying cry to reopen the Lone Star State. Now, these protests are a bit peculiar because Texas Governor Greg Abbott has said the state will start easing some of those restrictions as soon as this coming week. Be that as it may, people have the right to voice and demonstrate their concerns, address their grievances with governing officials. That's one of the hallmarks of this great republic. The protests in Texas were joined by similar demonstrations in Maryland, Wisconsin, and the great state of California. California protesters telling reporters this week they just want to get back to work. Of course, the closure of so-called non-essential businesses and reduced work hours or layoffs or even terminations have definitely affected the American worker, and people are wondering how they are going to pay rent and put food on the table. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio. Truly hard times out there for all Americans, and those hard times will continue until state and local leaders lift restrictions, allow businesses to reopen, and more people to go back to work, which is the purview of the states, not the federal government or the executive branch. And speaking of the chief executive of our republic, President Trump says the outbreak of COVID-19 has apparently peaked in the U.S. He made those remarks while speaking to reporters at the White House Saturday.
We continue to see a number of positive signs that the virus has passed its peak. It's been very devastating all over the world, 184 countries, probably more. This number was as of a week ago. Dr. Birx will walk through some of these trends in a few moments, but they're very positive trends for winning.
The president said the nation mourns the loss of life caused by the virus, but insisted U.S. mortality rates are lower than other nations.
On a per capita basis, remember that, on a per capita basis, our mortality rate is far lower than other nations of Western Europe, with the lone exception of possibly Germany. This includes the UK, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, France, Spain, for example, has a mortality rate that is nearly 4 times that of the United States. But you don't hear that. You hear we have more death. But we're a much bigger country than any of those countries, by far.
Now, the signs could be pointing to some sort of peak in infections, but in all honesty, we don't really know if the virus was present in January as first reported or earlier. And I, for one, and a lot of Americans feel this way, that we have not really been relieved by the information coming out of the White House, especially because there is not a unified message. The president says one thing, and Dr. Fauci and others have something different to say. Fauci is a brilliant man, been in his current role since the Reagan administration, and I don't think he's trying to purposefully contradict the president. I think the White House team needs to get on the same page, and preferably the page of the medical experts. So that first recorded case was on January 20th, but the virus may well have been here for months, and I'll touch on that in a moment. We now have recorded cases in all 50 states and pretty much every U.S. territory, New York and Louisiana being some of the hardest hit. American Samoa remains the only U.S. territory without confirmed cases of the virus. On to life on the West Coast. It's a beautiful time of the year in California, Oregon, and Washington. I do miss the Pacific Northwest and all of its splendor, but I'm here in California. After all, I'm a SoCal native, and I will always be a California boy at heart. Spring is here with all of the wonderful pollens that make us cough and sneeze, and, we are all much more in a heightened state of awareness now. Every cough, fever, or chest pain makes us wonder, do we have coronavirus? Well, you might, but it might not be COVID-19, the current strain we're all worried about and have these public health orders in place over. Of course, it would be nicer if we could all hit the trails or the sand and enjoy the sunshine, the cure for a lot of ailments. California Governor Gavin Newsom this week said the Golden State would be looking into a path forward as coronavirus cases in the state seemed to have peaked. The plan is a part of a pact with the states of Oregon and Washington. That path forward could include relaxing some restrictions and getting the state's economy back up and running. Here's Governor Newsom.
A few weeks back, I was giving a state of the state, talking about the fact that we had just entered into our 119th month of consecutive job growth in the state of California. We talked about the fact that we were averaging a GDP growth over a 5-year period of 3.8%, substantially outpacing the rest of the nation. We were enjoying lowest unemployment in modern recorded history, 3.9%. Today, I stand in front of you sobered by the reality of the last few weeks. We are now in a pandemic-induced recession here in the state of California. And while the new numbers came out today, 5.3% unemployment, that masks the reality of where the real unemployment rate is here today and ultimately will end up over the course of weeks and months.
Okay, a coronavirus-induced recession. So we're blaming the virus. That's a bit of to borrow a term from the governor, a broad stroke. The virus did not cause the recession. The recession, if we can even call it that at this point, is the result of orders by the government to shut down the so-called non-essential businesses and telling people to stay home. And this is all interesting considering the governor said, well, more than half of the state would be infected. And you've had Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti with his doomsday predictions, and yet here we are. The numbers are not as bad as the predictions. The medical need has not been as big as predicted. I'm wondering if California already hit the surge the experts say hasn't come yet. By the way, the state has spent, well, who knows how much on ventilators and other medical supplies. But did you know when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, he ordered the state to stockpile medical supplies, including masks and ventilators and hospital tents and everything you would need in a disaster. after he saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina. So, what happened to the medical stockpile the state of California had? Well, it all went away during Governor Jerry Brown's third term in office, and, well, why was that? Apparently, it was a budgeting decision. It cost the state a few million, somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million a year, to maintain the stockpile, which is a high number, but also comparatively low when you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar state annual budget. But Governor Brown's administration decided there was no need to maintain the medical stockpile, and what happened to all of it? Well, I'm afraid who knows. Newsom, by the way, was lieutenant governor when this decision was made. But then again, maybe Schwarzenegger bought too much. That's a possibility. Of course, the coronavirus could have been present in California much, much sooner. In fact, as far back as September or October, there was a National Review article about this, and we did have a really nasty flu in the winter last year, and that may very well could have been the novel coronavirus. You know, we get a lot more travel from Asia over here to the West Coast than we do on the East Coast. So we could have had the coronavirus a lot sooner here, and people, for the most part, are socially distanced here in California because we're not all crammed together, except in some cities we are. But for the most part, we're pretty spread out and we're pretty socially distanced naturally. So maybe that's why the numbers in California haven't been as bad, not because we put in place the social distancing restrictions beforehand, but maybe because we already had the virus and people already went through it and we just didn't know. Anyway, locally in San Diego, 3 huge money-making events for the region will not be happening. The San Diego County Fair, slated for June, usually brings in about 1 million people. Not happening. The Fair Board has decided to skip this year. San Diego Pride, one of the biggest LGBTQ events on the West Coast, brings in a lot of travelers, brings in a lot of business to restaurants and hotels. Slated for July, also not happening this year. Organizers are said to be looking at other ways to celebrate the gay, lesbian, bi, trans, queer, questioning community. And another July event, Comic-Con, which is huge importance, a huge importance to San Diego's economy, also not happening. The convention center is being used to shelter the homeless at this time anyway. Of course, Comic-Con is a huge moneymaker, and the event has gotten so big that organizers in recent years have told the city they need to get a bigger venue or they'll be forced to move the annual graphic novel, television, and pop culture extravaganza somewhere else. Expansion of the convention center complex and finding ways to deal with the city's ever-growing homeless problem has been talked about for years. At least we're making progress on road repairs at this time. In Faith and Freedom tonight, just want to give a shout out to the women and men of our National Guard. Many Guard units have been activated in states across the nation serving their communities in this time of need. Guard troops in Maryland have been delivering food to communities like Baltimore. They've been sewing face masks in Rhode Island and conducting medical screening in Montana, just to name a few places. Thank you again to our women and men of the Army and Air National Guard, and thank you to all who currently wear and those who have worn the uniform of the United States Armed Forces. Thank you for your service to our country. Some of our nation's churches are doing something they never thought they would have to do in postmodern society: hold worship without face-to-face meetings. And I'm not talking about the pick-a-name Christian Center or random action verb churches out there. I am talking about your grandma's church, the mom-and-pop churches in our neighborhoods, the First United Church on State and Main that's been there for 105 years. These are the congregations I'm talking about. So these churches are really stepping up, because you have pastors and deacons who are highly educated, but were never trained on a scenario where they had to keep their churches going without having people on the church campus. How do you hold worship without showing up in person? It's interesting because a lot of these church leaders have never had to embrace technology, live streaming, whether it be over Facebook or YouTube or Zoom or something else that people are getting creative with using now. But I have to hand it to these churches for stepping up and keeping people connected. And the reason why is because, again, some of these big Christian centers or multi-campus churches, they don't have this older population that a lot of these neighborhood churches do. And these older folks who are the 65 and older crowd who have been told to basically stay home and don't leave your house right now, well, going to church is one of the highlights of their week besides playing bridge. I mean, going to church is one of the things they look forward to. So I have to hand it to these neighborhood churches who are stepping up and trying to keep people connected any way they can, and for continuing a lot of their neighborhood service programs like food distribution. People are in need this time, and I'm really thankful that there are congregations out there who are not simply closing their doors, but are saying, we are still going to help the neighbors. We're still going to help our community in this time of need. So shout out to the churches who are stepping up to the challenge that we all are facing right now. It's been about 10 years now since the disastrous Deep Horizon BP oil spill that we all watched on television and heard about for days and days on the news, and there was even these measurements that we were given about how many gallons have spilled out into the ocean. It was really, really something tragic for the environment, and of course for business as well. BP really had to find ways to come back after this. Now, companies are drilling deeper and deeper waters, and the risks are still there, but industry leaders and government officials are determined to prevent another Deepwater Horizon-style disaster. David Nickerson, CEO of Marine Well Containment Company.
Certainly, Deepwater Horizon, which is a trigger event for Marine Well Containment Company, was a tremendous tragedy. It was a tremendous tragedy for all of industry, and all of industry wanted to make sure that nothing similar could ever happen again. Over the years, 6 other members have joined. Today we have 10 total members, and to date about $1.5 billion of capital has been spent on the response equipment that we need in the event that there's another blowout in the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico.
This week in U.S. history, April 12th, 1861, the bloodiest years in American history begins when Confederate troops attack Fort Sumter, beginning the Civil War. April 13th, 1997, 21-year-old golf phenom Tiger Woods wins the Masters for the first time. April 14th, 1865, Southern sympathizer John Wilkes Booth fatally shoots one of the nation's greatest leaders, President Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln died the following morning. April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson becomes the first African-American player in Major League Baseball as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers. April 16th, 2007, deadly shooting at Virginia Tech, leaving 32 people dead after being gunned down by a student. April 17th, 1970, Apollo 13 returns to Earth, and April 18th, 1906, the Great San Francisco Earthquake, a devastating magnitude 8.0, toppling buildings and killing some 3,000 people. Well, that's our program for tonight. If you like what you hear, reach out to me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Eddie McCoven TV. Make sure to share this independently produced podcast with others. This is Your Week. I'm Eddie McCoven, and remember, as Sir Winston Churchill once said, the price of greatness is responsibility. Good night, America.